I personally believe in a world with less borders, and I try to see and connect with people more on a human level and what we have in common. I know identity and patriotism and nationalism are always being kind of like, um, shoved in our face, and you always have to try to express your identity and your nationality and your patriotism wherever you are around the world. And I think that sometimes is good, and then for the most time, it's
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
challenging. So, but for me personally, I grew up, honestly, I say this, as somebody who from the very young age of 5 have been traveling between cultures. So I have grown up literally with one foot in the West, one foot in the East. I mean, every couple of years, with the exception of New York. I mean, here's another way to think about it. With the exception of New York, which is now the longest I have lived in any city and where my children were born, I had never lived in any city more than 5
Hmm.
years from the age that I was,
Yeah.
1. So for me, it was just always part of me growing up that I lived in different countries and cultures.
Tell me about what 9/11 meant to you, or how did it impact you? I know that you were already working at the time. Were you an intern, or were you already an employee at NBC, right?
Yeah, no, so I was a desk assistant, which
Okay.
is a step above an intern. It's
Right.
it's an entry level program,
Yep.
but it's not a permanent
Hmm.
position
Hmm.
within the news organization.
Yep.
So it's an 18-month program, or at least it was when I was there, it was around 18 months. You are introduced to the newsroom. So you are answering phones, at the time, fax machines, you are distributing mail, you were distributing newspapers, you were doing whatever kind of administrative editorial job that was assigned to you.
Hmm.
But you're really in the thick of it. You're in the center of the newsroom and you're kind of seeing everything.
And you were in Washington, right, at the time?
I was going to American University, finishing up my master's program, my master's degree, and the campus is right across the street from the old NBC studio. So I was literally
Hmm.
walking to
Hmm.
go to do my desk
Right.
assistant program there. And the summer before 9/11, I had been doing it for about 6 months. My first day ever was literally George Bush's inauguration. That was the
Okay.
first day I
Okay.
started
Yep.
working as a desk
Yep.
assistant. So from January of that year until September of that year, I would say that I wasn't very enamored by it. It was the summer where, as they say in the news world, the news cycle was very slow.
Yep.
It was a summer of shark attacks.
July, August is
Yeah,
always
there was like a summer of shark attacks off the coast of Florida that were like the big stories, and there was a big scandal in Washington D.C. with a congressman, and so I think for me, I was like, I'm not sure this is what I necessarily wanted to do, having seen that part up close. And I was thinking about going to law school. I,
Hmm.
wanted to apply to law school. I took my
Yep.
LSATs and was starting that process of trying to go into law school. And 9/11 happened, and that really kind of changed my world.
How did it feel to be there when that happened?
So to be honest with you, I think because I was a college student and, perhaps there's like a little different atmosphere of what you're exposed to. I was living in Washington, D.C. I would say that I don't know if I ever felt threatened. I was actually a little bit more concerned for my parents, because I was aware that, as Arab Americans, as Muslim Americans living in the South, I was thinking maybe they would experience some backlash. Maybe they would hear something from a neighbor who would say something in passing or
Mhm.
do something.
And as immigrants, they're not as empowered as the second generation as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I mean, I think they never experienced anything. So I mean, like at the end of the day, they personally never experienced
Mhm.
anything, which I'm not naive to say like there was no backlash.
Sure.
But in terms of my own personal experience, I never experienced. I mean, we all had these like running jokes about what to wear and what to dress at the airport,
Yeah.
and when you
We all
started,
did. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, in a
Yeah.
way that we were like anticipating the
Sure.
backlash.
Sure.
So I think for us consciously, we were like, let's be mindful of not kind of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, because you started hearing about all these instances of people being pulled off planes because of what they were wearing. And if you speak Arabic with someone, so there was these in a kind of a humorous way, they're running jokes among my friends and stuff about like
Sure.
how to behave and
Sure.
stuff and
Yeah.
assimilate and maybe
Yeah.
downplay your Arabness.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, I didn't experience any negative backlash.
Hmm.
What it did, though, on a more kind of like important point, was it really opened my eyes to how grave of a situation we were experiencing between what was happening in the Middle East and the West. And the perils that we were about to find ourselves in, because I think I realized quickly on, following 9/11, that what the Middle East was about to undergo because of what America was about to do was going to be disastrous, was going to be the defining thing of my
Mm.
lifetime. I mean, you didn't have to be a genius to see that what the United States was about to embark on. And we're still,
Yeah.
I mean, literally still
Yeah.
paying the price of that attack and the American
Yeah.
reaction to that attack. I understood why there is a great sense of resentment towards America in the Middle East. I don't think you have to be um, I don't think you have to be a genius to know that America's policies in the Middle East evoke very negative reactions, very hypocritical foreign policies, very contradictory foreign policies that are not grounded on in any values or interests. So that is not in any way, shape, or form a justification for attacks. But I think this questioning of why do they hate us, um, I think was a very stupid question. I mean, it was all over the newspapers in America. People, it was on the
It
cover
was on
of,
the cover of Time,
it was
right?
on
Or
the cover of,
Newsweek.
I forgot which magazine, Newsweek, Time, but it was on the cover of a lot of things. Why do they hate us?
But
And ask
was
them,
it a stupid question, Ayman? I don't know if it was, because if you're living in North Dakota and you don't follow international news, that's a perfectly legitimate question.
fair. Maybe it's not a stupid question. Maybe the answer of like trying to explain, um, you know, if you don't explain to your audience what you're doing, you can't then wake up the next morning and say, hey, why do they hate us? If you're ignorant about what your government is doing, if you're unaware about the abuses and the atrocities and the way your government is perpetuating dictators and authoritarian regimes and exploiting the resources of a region and playing up conflict to constantly keep a region unstable, favoring one government over the other, perpetuating a military occupation of another group, if you're doing that and your own people are ignorant about it, the question isn't really why do they hate us? The question should be more about like, this is why they hate us. Okay. So
Yeah.
it's more about the
Framing the
framing of
question
it's
differently.
exactly. So in a perfect world, yeah, I guess I understand your point that the question is right. I think it's very disingenuous to say that the American government and the American media at the time of 9/11 were unaware of what America was doing in the region,
Yeah.
in the Middle East, and
Yeah.
being unable to explain that to the
Yeah.
American audience, which is what is one of the main factors um, that I try to, again, in my show, in my reporting, is you have to know what your government is doing in this part of the world to understand why there are certain tensions and certain views and certain perspectives about America. So I was finishing up that desk assistant program. 9/11 happened. I realized that there was a lot of opportunity for me because I was thrown into the deep end where I was starting to work on a lot of the 9/11 related investigations because I spoke Arabic. So I realized two things. One, because of my cultural background and the experience that I had in the Middle East, I was able to offer insight into a part of this attack journalistically. So I started being drawn more into the career. And the following year, President Bush started talking about um,
Iraq.
Iraq and the potential to invade Iraq and the
Hmm.
axis of evil speech that he gave. And all the news organizations at the time, I think, realized this is where America is going. This is where the coverage is going. This is where the
Hmm.
next big story is going. Is that it's going to be Iraq. It's going to be the Middle East. America was simply not done with what it did in Afghanistan. And so at that time, I decided to pursue journalism full on, and I left NBC after the internship program, and I went to, or desk assistant program, and I went to go work for CNN as a freelance producer. You know how we were talking about immigrants and whether or not I could make the same decision my parents made to become immigrants. I often think about would I have let my children do what I did as a young freelance producer going
Absolutely.
to a war
Sure.
zone. I mean,
Sure.
2003, I was 24 years old and I went to Iraq as a freelance producer. So I wasn't, although I was working for
Hmm.
CNN, I wasn't staff, I wasn't
Yeah.
contract, I didn't have like all the benefits that come with
Sure.
being a staff
Sure.
employee. And I was 24 years old. I had never been in a war zone, and here I was going into arguably one of the most destructive wars, and subsequently what came after in the next 3 years of this brutal insurgency, this sectarian war. Um, I wonder if I would not let, but I would allow my children, if they really came to
Yeah.
me at that age and say, I want to do this with that zero experience. But nonetheless, my parents, they didn't get in my way. They understood it. They obviously warned me about it, but I did it. And I went to Baghdad. And those 3 years, more or less 2.5 years, 3 years, from 2003 till 2006, I was based in Baghdad, but I covered the region, mostly Baghdad. and they were very eye-opening. I don't even know. I honestly don't have words to describe them because it was violent, deadly, brutal. Just
But
I saw
what
a side of humanity that really kind of shocked me in early years of my life.
how does that impact you though? Because surely there's some lingering trauma. I mean, not now, maybe you've assimilated it and you've processed it, but that is really traumatic stuff for a young guy to be dealing with. How does that impact you?
I mean, listen, it's hard. I don't know if I have an answer to that question. I don't know how it has impacted me. I may have developed traits that are probably not very good traits as a result of that trauma, or seeing that up close, seeing that kind of destruction and that death and just all the kind of like,
But did it make
ugliness
you
that goes
did
with it.
it make you risk averse, or did it make you run more towards it? Because I mean, I know a lot of foreign correspondents who, for example, they relish that. They live for that. They go back to their home and they're waiting for the next assignment to get back in the field. Is that you, or are you much more measured in your approach to it?
I I think you become more measured. I think when you're young, but I don't honestly. I don't know anyone who relishes going to see war or relishes to go see destruction I think people.
From the high of it, like the excitement of it. That's what I mean.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. That's the kind of high that you want. I mean, I don't know anyone who wants the high of potentially dying. I think there's a more fundamental question, which is, and this part I agree with, which is a lot of journalists at some point in their life ask themselves a fundamental question. Is it important for me to risk my life to see up close this destruction and this devastation and to report on it? And you ask yourself that question with the purpose of saying, if it is, you do it again.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
once you fundamentally believe that what you are doing is important,
Yeah,
then you say, I
yeah,
am committed to this.
yeah.
And perhaps later on in life, when things change, you have a family, you start a family,
Sure,
something happens, you lose a friend, you reevaluate that
sure,
question.
sure.
But once you've answered that question, then you are committed to it. So for me, at least as a 24-year-old, when I started seeing war and conflict up close, I felt that there was a need to be able to explain to my viewers and audience and the cameramen and the producers who all do the same job to say, there's something here that needs to be explained,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And tell me about your current show. Tell me, what is the thinking behind it? What is the ethos of it?
So, I mean, the show is the show's titled Ayman. So I guess you get a perspective of um, my worldview and how I approach a lot of the big political and foreign issues that America is facing, both culturally as well as politically. And look, at the end of the day, there are certain things that I am very comfortable talking about, and there's other things that I am more interested in, and there are things that I'm still learning about. So I try to be as raw, as candid as I can with my perspectives on a lot of these issues. I try to bring interesting guests. We try to have dynamic interviews. I try not to fall into a groupthink mindset when we talk about a lot of big foreign policy issues, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or Israel, Palestine. I try to have a different perspective on a lot of these things, be a little bit more critical. And a lot of that is shaped by my own personal experience, having lived overseas and experienced what the world sometimes thinks about American politics and American foreign policy. I try to bring that experience into the conversations I have on my show.